They said she was the problem, so the town turned their backs while her bruises told the truth. By morning, Clara Whitmore was already packing to leave, hands shaking, eyes hollow. Ethan watched from the porch, silent, like he was measuring something no one else could see. "You stay, you bring trouble," the sheriff warned. Ethan didn't answer, just walked past him, dropped a second saddle on his horse, and tightened the strap. Clara froze. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He glanced once, calm as desert wind. "Because nobody else will." And somewhere beyond the hills, the men hunting her were getting closer. Full story on my channel. He didn't draw his gun, because he didn't need to. The riders stopped 30 yards out, dust hanging in the air like something waiting to break. Harlan Briggs smiled first, slow and cruel. "You really think you can keep her?" Clara's breath caught, fingers tightening around that small knife. Ethan stepped forward, just one step, boots pressing into dry earth. "No fear. No hurry. She ain't yours," he said. Quiet. Final. The men laughed, until Clara moved past him, standing on her own, voice steady for the first time. "I'm not running anymore." And suddenly, the silence felt heavier than any gunshot. Full story on my channel. She stopped trusting words the night they all turned into lies. And the first thing she did when Ethan Cole touched her arm was reach for a blade. The sun was dropping low over the dry hills, casting long shadows across a ranch that hadn't seen a visitor in months, maybe longer, and there she was, barely standing, dust clinging to her dress, eyes scanning every inch of open land like something was always about to come over the ridge, something she couldn't outrun anymore. Ethan didn't move fast, didn't raise his voice, didn't crowd her space. Just stood there with the quiet kind of stillness that came from years of working land that didn't care whether you lived or not. "Easy," he said, low, steady, like he was talking to a frightened horse more than a person, and for a second, just a second, her grip tightened instead of loosening. Clara Whitmore. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know where she came from or what had carved that look into her eyes, but he knew fear when he saw it, knew the kind that settled deep and stayed there, long after the danger passed. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and old wood, the kind of smell that stuck to a place, made it feel forgotten, and maybe that's why she had come here. Or maybe she hadn't meant to come at all, just ended up at the edge of something that looked quieter than where she'd been. "You don't want this trouble," she said, voice rough, like it hadn't been used for anything but silence. And there was no anger in it, no warning, just a tired kind of truth, like she was telling him how things were, not asking him to change them. Ethan studied her for a moment. Not her face, not the dirt or the wear, but the way she held herself, like she was ready to disappear the second he made the wrong move. And something about that didn't sit right with him, something older than reason, older than caution. He had spent years minding his own business, keeping his world small, manageable, quiet, and it had worked, mostly, but quiet didn't mean right. And standing there with the last light of day cutting across the land, he felt that line shift. He took one step closer, slow enough not to startle, close enough to be heard without raising his voice. "Didn't ask for trouble," he said. Then, after a beat, softer, but heavier, like it carried more than just words, "Just saw you standing there." She looked at him then, really looked, like she was trying to decide if he was just another mistake waiting to happen. And for a moment the world held still between them, no wind, no sound, just distance, and something unspoken stretching across it. The knife in her hand lowered half an inch. Not trust, not yet, but something had shifted. And Ethan Cole, who had spent years keeping to himself, realized without saying it out loud that whatever had followed her here wasn't finished. And neither was he. Clara did not step forward, and she did not step back either. And somehow that was the first time she had stood still in a very long time. The last light of the day stretched thin across the ranch, turning dust into gold and shadows into long quiet warnings, and Ethan could feel the shift in the air the same way a man feels a storm before it shows itself on the horizon. He did not reach for the knife in her hand, did not ask her to drop it, because he understood something simple that most men missed. Fear does not listen to commands. Instead, he turned slightly, just enough to break the tension, and walked toward the small wooden house, as if she were already safe enough to follow. "Water is inside," he said, not looking back, not checking if she moved, leaving the choice entirely in her hands. For a few seconds, nothing happened, just wind brushing through dry grass and the distant creak of an old fence shifting under its own weight. And then, soft, careful footsteps behind him. Inside, the air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of coffee grounds and worn leather. A place built for one man, not two, and certainly not for someone who flinched at every sound. Clara stopped near the doorway, not crossing fully, as if invisible lines still held her in place, her eyes moving over everything. The table, the chair, the window, always the window, measuring distance, exits, risk. Ethan poured water into a tin cup and set it on the table, then stepped away, giving her space that felt earned, not forced. She waited until he moved back before taking it, her hands steady for the first time. Though her shoulders still carried tension like a weight, she had forgotten how to set down. "You live alone?" she asked, her voice quieter now, less like a warning, more like a question she did not want answered. "Yes," he said. No explanation followed. None needed. Silence settled again, but this time it did not press as hard. Outside, somewhere far off, a faint sound drifted across the open land, something distant but deliberate, like hooves striking dry ground miles away, too far to see, too close to ignore if you knew what to listen for. Clara heard it too. Her hand tightened around the cup, and just like that, the calm broke, not loudly, not suddenly, but like something returning exactly where it had always been waiting. "They will not stop," she said, more to herself than to him, her eyes already moving back toward the door, calculating, planning, preparing to run again even before her body had rested. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms loose at his sides, not blocking her path, not forcing her to stay, just present in a way that did not demand anything. "Maybe," he said, calm, steady, as if distance did not matter and time did not rush him. Then he glanced toward the window, toward that far line where sky met land, where something unseen was slowly getting closer, and his voice lowered just enough to carry weight without effort. "But you do not have to keep running tonight." Clara looked at him then, really looked, searching for something she had learned not to trust, and for the first time since she stepped onto his land, she did not move toward the door. Clara did not realize she had stopped planning her escape until the silence inside the house began to feel different, not like a pause before running, but like something holding steady for once, and that unsettled her more than the sound outside ever could. The cup in her hands had gone still, the water no longer trembling, and she noticed that before she noticed her own breathing had slowed. Ethan had not moved much, had not filled the room with questions or expectations, and that absence of pressure made space for something unfamiliar, something she did not trust yet. Outside, the faint rhythm of distant movement came and went with the wind, sometimes there, sometimes gone, like a memory that refused to stay buried, and each time it returned, her eyes flicked toward the door without thinking. "They follow tracks," she said after a while, her voice low, controlled, like she had repeated the thought too many times to let it break her anymore. "Dust holds it. So does fear." Ethan nodded once, not because he needed the explanation, but because he understood what she was really saying, that running had become a habit shaped by necessity, not choice. He walked to the window, not sharply, not urgently, just enough to look out across the land stretching for miles, open and honest in a way people rarely were, and he studied the horizon with the patience of someone who had learned that rushing never made anything arrive slower. The light had almost disappeared now, leaving behind that deep blue hour where shapes softened and distances blurred, where a man had to trust what he felt more than what he saw. "You can stay here tonight," he said, simple, like it was. Not a decision that needed weight, just a fact placed gently between them. Clara's grip tightened again, not from fear this time, but from hesitation, the kind that came when something offered did not match what she expected from the world. "And tomorrow?" she asked, because tomorrow was always the part that broke people, not the night. Ethan leaned one shoulder against the frame, arms still loose, posture easy, as if the question did not demand an immediate answer. "Tomorrow we see what comes," he said. "Not a promise, not a plan, just enough." Clara looked down at the knife still resting in her other hand, smaller now somehow, less like a shield and more like something she had been carrying out of habit. Slowly, almost without noticing, she set it on the table. The sound was soft, but it carried. Ethan heard it. He did not look at it. That mattered more than anything he could have said. Outside, the distant rhythm returned again, a little clearer this time. Still far, still uncertain, but real enough to press against the edges of the quiet. Clara lifted her eyes toward the door, then back to Ethan, and for the first time, the thought of staying did not feel like a mistake waiting to happen. It felt like standing still long enough to decide who she was without running. And somewhere beyond the fading light, whatever had been chasing her kept moving forward, unaware that for the first time, she had stopped moving away. The night settled slow over the ranch, not with noise, but with a kind of quiet that made every small sound feel heavier. The creak of wood, the whisper of wind slipping through the cracks, the distant rhythm that came and went like something deciding when to be heard. Clara sat near the table, hands now empty, eyes no longer darting to every shadow, but not fully at rest either, like a storm that had not passed, only paused. Ethan moved with the same measured calm, lighting a single lamp that cast a soft glow across the room, enough to see, not enough to chase away every corner of darkness, and somehow that felt right, like the night did not need to be forced away to be endured. He set a folded blanket on the chair across from her, not offering it directly, just placing it within reach, the same way he had done everything since she arrived, never taking, never pushing, only leaving space. Clara watched the gesture, small, almost unnoticeable, but it landed heavier than anything loud or dramatic ever could, and after a moment, she reached for it, pulling it around her shoulders as if remembering what warmth felt like. Outside, the land stretched wide and open, but the darkness made it feel closer, tighter, like the horizon had moved in without asking, and that distant sound returned again, clearer now, no longer a question, but not yet an answer. Clara's head turned slightly, instinct pulling her attention back to the door, but she did not rise, did not reach for the knife she had set down, and that absence of movement said more than fear ever had. "They travel at night," she said quietly, her voice steady, not breaking, just stating what she knew as truth. Ethan nodded once from where he stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the fading outline of the land, watching without strain, without urgency, like he had already accepted what might come and decided it did not change anything about where he stood. "Then we meet morning when it comes," he replied, simple, not defiant, not careless, just certain in a way that did not need to be proven. Clara studied him again, searching for the cracks people usually carried, the hesitation, the second thought, the shift that always came when things became real, but there was none, only that same quiet steadiness that had not changed since the moment he found her. She lowered her gaze after a while, not in defeat, but in something closer to relief, and the weight she had been carrying seemed to settle somewhere outside of her for the first time in longer than she could remember. The lamp flickered once as the wind pressed lightly against the walls, and in that brief shift of light, the room felt less like a place she had entered and more like a place she had been allowed to stay. Outside, beyond what could be seen, the rhythm continued, closer now, deliberate, patient, but inside, something had already changed. Clara Whitmore did not run, and Ethan Cole did not move aside. The sound came just before dawn, not loud, not rushed, but steady enough that it no longer blended with the wind, and Ethan Cole was already awake when the first shape appeared along the far ridge, a dark outline against the pale blue horizon that stretched wide across the land like something inevitable finally arriving. He stood on the porch with a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the distance, reading movement the way other men read words, slow, deliberate, no panic, no confusion, just understanding. Inside, Clara stirred before she fully woke, her body reacting before her mind caught up, and for a moment she did not know where she was, only that the quiet felt different, heavier, like something had crossed into it. She sat up quickly, the blanket falling from her shoulders, her eyes going straight to the door, then to the window, and then to the empty space where the knife still rested on the table. Outside, the shapes grew clearer, not many, but enough, moving in a line that spoke of purpose, not chance, and the distance between them and the ranch was closing with every slow, measured step of their horses. Ethan set the cup down on the railing without drinking from it, the faint sound of ceramic against wood barely noticeable, and he stepped off the porch into the dust, boots pressing into ground that had not seen visitors in a long time. He did not reach for his weapon. Not yet. Inside, Clara stood, her breath shallow but controlled, and for a second, the old instinct surged back, the need to leave, to run before the moment became real. But she stopped halfway to the door, her hand hovering near the frame, caught between what she had always done and what she had started to believe. She could hear them now too, the faint rhythm of hooves no longer distant, no longer uncertain, and the sound did not chase her forward this time. It held her where she stood. Ethan remained in the open, not hiding, not signaling, just there, visible, steady, as the riders approached within 100 yards, then 80, then 60, the morning light revealing more detail with every passing second. Clara stepped out onto the porch, the wood cool beneath her bare feet, her eyes moving from the riders to Ethan, and she saw it then, not courage, not recklessness, but something quieter, something harder to break, a man who had already decided where he stood before anyone else arrived to question it. The riders slowed, not stopping completely, but not pressing forward either, the space between them and the ranch holding like a line drawn without words. Clara felt the old fear rise, familiar, sharp, but it did not take over the way it used to, and for the first time since she had started running, she did not step back. She stepped forward, just one step, enough to stand beside him, not behind, not hidden, and the movement was small, almost invisible, but it changed something in the air that could not be undone. Ethan did not look at her, did not acknowledge it with anything more than the slight shift of his weight, making space without making it obvious, and together they faced what had come across miles of open land to find her, not as something being chased, but as something that had chosen, finally, to stop. The riders stopped at 40 yards, not because they had to, but because something in the way Ethan Cole stood made going any closer feel like crossing a line that had not been spoken but was clearly there. Dust settled slowly around their horses, the early light catching on worn leather and quiet faces, and for a long second, no one said anything, not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone understood that whatever came next would matter. Clara felt it in her chest, that familiar tightening, the memory of being seen as something to take, to follow, to corner, but this time the feeling did not pull her backward, it held her steady where she stood. Ethan did not step forward again, did not reach for anything at his side, just let the space remain what it was, enough distance for choice, not force. One of the riders shifted slightly in the saddle, not threatening, not relaxed either, just measuring, the same way Ethan had measured the horizon earlier. "We are looking for someone," the man said, his voice carrying across the open ground without strain, calm, certain, like he expected the world to answer him. Clara's breath caught, but she did not move. Ethan tilted his head just enough to acknowledge the words without yielding anything to them. "A lot of land out here," he replied, his tone even, almost casual, as if the question had no weight beyond conversation. The man's eyes moved past him then, not quickly, not carelessly, but deliberately, and for the first time, Clara felt the full weight of being seen, not hidden behind distance or darkness, but standing in the open, choosing not to step back. The moment stretched, thin and sharp, and something inside her wanted to break it, to run, to disappear into the space behind the house where the land dipped and twisted, but she stayed. The man looked back to Ethan, a small shift, almost respectful. "She left tracks," he said, not accusing, not yet, just stating what could not be undone. Ethan's gaze did not follow, did not betray anything behind him, and that restraint, that refusal to look, felt louder than any denial. "Tracks lead a lot of places," he answered, the words landing without force, but not moving aside either. The wind moved between them, carrying the dry scent of the land, brushing against coats and sleeves, a quiet reminder that nothing here belonged to any one man. Clara felt her hand twitch at her side, the memory of the knife still fresh, but she did not reach for it, did not fall back into what she had always done. Instead, she took another small step forward, enough that her presence could not be mistaken, enough that the question no longer belonged only to Ethan. The rider's eyes shifted to her again, and this time, they lingered, searching, not for fear, but for something else, something that had not been there before. Clara lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance, not in challenge, just in quiet refusal to shrink. And when she spoke, her voice did not tremble. "You found me," she said, simple, steady, and the words changed the shape of the moment in a way no movement could have. Ethan did not turn toward her, but something in his stance settled deeper, as if the ground beneath him had firmed, and the line that had been invisible before became something no one stepped across without knowing exactly what they were doing. The words settled into the space between them, not loud, not sharp, but heavy enough that no one ignored them, and for a moment, even the wind seemed to ease back, as if the land itself was waiting to see what would follow. The rider in front studied Clara with a different kind of attention now, no longer just tracking, but weighing, the way a man measures something he did not expect to find standing its ground. "You came a long way," he said after a pause, his voice quieter, less certain than before, as if the answer mattered more than the question. Clara did not look away. The fear was still there. It had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled where she stood or how she spoke. "Far enough," she replied, and there was something in the way she said it that did not invite anything further, not sympathy, not argument, just truth left where it could not be undone. Ethan remained beside her, not stepping in front, not taking the words from her, and that choice carried its own kind of weight, one that said she did not need to be spoken for. The other riders shifted slightly, small movements, hands resting easier on reins, shoulders losing some of their tension, not because the situation had softened, but because it had changed shape into something less predictable. The man in front glanced once more at Ethan, and this time there was something closer to recognition than challenge in his eyes, as if he understood that whatever claim had brought them here did not stand alone anymore. "We were told you would not stop," he said, the statement directed at Clara, but shared with the space between them all. Clara drew in a slow breath, feeling the morning air fill her chest, steady, real, not something she had to fight to keep. "I did not," she answered. "I just chose where to stand." The words did not sound like much, but they carried further than she expected, settling into the silence that followed like something that belonged there. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, boots pressing into the dust, not moving forward, not retreating, simply grounding himself in the place he had chosen, and the gesture, small as it was, closed the space just enough to make it clear that this was not a moment that would be pushed aside. The rider nodded once, slow, thoughtful, and for a second, the line that had held between them softened, not erased, but acknowledged. "Then you have made it," he said, not as a question, not as a threat, but as something closer to acceptance. Clara felt the tension in her shoulders loosen, not completely, not all at once, but enough to breathe without holding something back, and she realized that what had followed her across miles of land had not been the end she feared, but the moment she had been running toward without knowing it. Ethan did not speak, did not claim anything from it, just remained where he was, quiet and steady, the same as when she first saw him, and somehow that consistency mattered more now than anything else. The riders did not move closer, and they did not turn away either, but the weight of their presence shifted into something less pressing, something that no longer demanded she run. And in that quiet, with the sun lifting slowly over the horizon and the land stretching wide and open around them, Clara Whitmore understood for the first time that stopping had not been the risk. It had been the answer. The sun rose higher, slow and steady, spilling light across the land until every shadow had a place to fall, and with it came a clarity that made everything feel sharper, more real, like there was no more space left for doubt to hide. The riders remained where they were, no closer, no farther, their presence no longer pressing forward but not retreating either, as if they too were waiting for something that could not be rushed. Ethan shifted slightly, not a step, just enough to ease the weight in his stance, and the movement was subtle, but it carried a message. This was not a standoff, not something to be forced, just a moment that needed to be understood. Clara felt the warmth of the sun touch her shoulders, cutting through the chill that had followed her for days, maybe longer, and she realized she was no longer counting distance, no longer measuring how far she could go before something caught up to her. That habit, the one that had shaped every step she had taken, had gone quiet. The lead rider studied her again, but there was no urgency in it now, No push to close the gap. Only a kind of recognition that had not been there before, like he was seeing not just where she had been, but where she had decided to stand. No one chased you this far without reason, he said finally, the words calm, not accusing, but carrying the weight of something that needed to be answered. Clara let the silence sit for a moment before responding, not because she did not have the answer, but because she was choosing how to give it. I did not leave because I was weak, she said, her voice steady, grounded in something deeper than fear. I left because I was done being told where I belong. The words settled into the open air, carried just far enough to reach every ear without needing to be repeated. Ethan did not turn toward her, but something in his posture shifted again, a quiet confirmation that she did not stand alone, even as she spoke for herself. The rider nodded once, slow, thoughtful, and the tension that had once defined the space between them eased further, not gone, but changed into something that no longer demanded action. Then you have already answered us, he said, and there was no challenge in it now, no edge, just a statement that closed something rather than opening it. The other riders adjusted in their saddles, small movements that signaled a shift without words, and for the first time since they arrived, the line between them and the ranch no longer felt like something waiting to be crossed. Clara let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, and it did not come out sharp or shaky, just steady, like the rest of her had begun to follow. The land stretched around them, wide and open, unchanged, but something within it had settled into place, something that did not need to be proven or defended. Ethan glanced once toward the horizon, then back to the riders, and without speaking, the moment reached its quiet end. No one turned abruptly. No one forced it. The riders began to shift away, slow, deliberate, their presence easing back into the distance they had come from, and the sound of their horses faded not as a threat, but as something passing through. Clara stood there beside Ethan, the sun now fully above the hills, and for the first time since she had stepped onto this land, the silence that followed did not feel like something waiting to break. It felt like something finally at rest. The dust settled long after the riders disappeared over the ridge, as if the land itself needed time to believe they were truly gone, and Clara Whitmore remained standing. Where she was, not because she had to, but because she no longer felt the need to move. The silence that followed was different now, not the kind that waited for something to break it, but the kind that held steady, like a breath finally released after being held too long. Ethan Cole did not speak right away. He turned slightly, glancing across the open stretch of land where the riders had been, then back toward the house, as if measuring not the distance they had left, but the quiet they had returned. They will not come back, he said after a moment, not as reassurance, but as something simple and certain, like the sun rising or the wind changing direction. Clara let the words settle, not questioning them, not testing them, just letting them exist where they were, and for the first time in days, maybe longer, she did not feel the need to prepare for what came next. She stepped off the porch slowly, boots touching the dust with a kind of care that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with realizing she was no longer being pushed forward. Ethan watched her for a second, not closely, not intensely, just enough to see that she was no longer standing on the edge of leaving. You can go if you want, he said, his voice even, giving her something he had not taken before, a choice without expectation. Clara looked out across the land, the same land that had felt endless and closing in at the same time when she had been running through it. And now it looked different, not smaller, not safer, just open in a way that did not feel like a threat. She shook her head slightly, almost to herself. I am tired of going, she said, and the words carried a weight that was not heavy anymore, just real. Ethan nodded once, not asking what that meant, not turning it into something more than it needed to be, and he stepped back toward the house, leaving space for her to follow or not, the same way he had from the beginning. Clara stood there a second longer, feeling the warmth of the morning settle into her skin, the breeze moving through her hair without urgency, without warning, and she realized something simple, something she had not allowed herself to believe. Before, nothing was chasing her anymore. Not footsteps, not shadows, not voices carried across the wind, just quiet. She turned then, not quickly, not out of instinct, but out of decision, and walked toward the house, her steps steady, not measured for escape, but for arrival. Ethan opened the door without looking back, not checking if she was behind him, trusting that if she chose to come, she would. And she did. Inside, the room felt the same as it had before. The table, the chair, the window, but something had changed in the way she saw it, not as a place to pass through, but as a place she could stand without needing to leave. Ethan moved to the side, setting another cup on the table, the gesture small, almost unnoticeable, but it carried the same quiet meaning as everything else he had done. Clara sat down slowly, her hands resting on the table, no longer gripping, no longer ready to pull away, and she let the silence settle around her without fighting it. Outside, the land stretched on as it always had, wide and indifferent, but for the first time, it did not feel like something she had to outrun. It felt like something she could finally face without turning away. And that, more than anything else, was what changed her life. The morning moved forward without asking anything from them. The kind of steady passage of time that did not rush or wait, just continued. And Clara found herself noticing small things she had ignored for too long. The way the lights settled on the wooden table, the faint sound of wind brushing past the walls, the quiet rhythm of a place that did not demand anything from her. Ethan Cole moved about the room without urgency, not avoiding her, not focusing on her either, just living in the space the same way he always had. And that consistency, that lack of change, made something inside Clara ease in a way she could not explain. He poured coffee into 2 cups, setting one near her without a word, then stepping back as if the act required no attention. Clara looked at it for a moment before wrapping her hands around the warmth, the simple gesture grounding her more than anything else had. "They believed I would keep running," she said after a while, her voice quieter now. Not guarded, just thoughtful, like she was speaking to herself as much as to him. Ethan leaned lightly against the wall, arms resting at his sides, listening without interruption. "People believe what they are used to seeing," he replied, not dismissing her words, not adding weight to them either, just placing them where they belonged. Clara nodded slowly, her gaze drifting toward the window where the land stretched out, unchanged, but no longer threatening. "I believed it too," she admitted, and there was no shame in it, only truth. The admission did not hang heavy in the air. It settled gently, like something that had finally been said without needing to be defended. Ethan did not respond right away. He stepped outside onto the porch, the boards creaking softly under his weight, and Clara watched him for a moment before following, not out of habit, but out of choice. The day had fully arrived now, the sun high enough to warm the ground, the sky wide and clear, and the absence of anything approaching felt almost unfamiliar, like a silence that no longer needed to be questioned. Ethan rested his hands lightly on the railing, looking out across the land not as something to guard, but as something to understand, and Clara stood beside him, not searching the horizon for danger, but simply seeing it for what it was. "What happens now?" she asked, not out of fear, but because she had never stayed long enough to ask that question before. Ethan considered it for a moment, not because the answer was complicated, but because it did not need to be rushed. "Now you decide," he said, and the simplicity of it carried more meaning than anything else he could have offered. Clara let out a slow breath, the kind that did not come from relief, but from realization, and she understood then that nothing had been taken from her, not here, not by him, only given back in a way she had not expected. She was not being told where to go, not being asked to leave, not being held in place. She was simply being allowed to choose. The land stretched out before her, open, endless, but for the first time, it did not feel like something she had to cross. It felt like something she could stay within, without fear of what might follow. And standing there, beside a man who had never once tried to control her path, she realized that the promise he made had never been about stopping the world from reaching her. It had been about giving her the space to stand when it did. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the ranch no longer felt like a place caught between something that had happened and something that might return. It felt settled, not because the world had changed, but because Clara had. She moved through the small space with a quiet awareness, not cautious in the way she had been before, but deliberate, noticing where things were, how they were placed, as if understanding a place meant understanding how to remain in it. Ethan Cole worked outside near the fence line, repairing a loose post with slow, steady movements, the kind that did not rush toward completion, but respected the time it took to do something right. Clara stepped out onto the porch, the sunlight warm against her skin, and watched him for a moment, not as someone observing a stranger, but as someone trying to understand a presence that had never asked anything from her. He did not look up immediately, not because he ignored her, but because he trusted she would speak if she needed to. That trust, quiet and unspoken, held more weight than any question could have. "Why did you stay?" she asked finally, her voice carrying across the short distance without strain, simple, direct, not wrapped in doubt. Ethan finished pressing the post into place before answering, his hands brushing off the dust in a slow, absent motion. He glanced at her then, not searching her face, just meeting her eyes long enough to answer honestly. "Because leaving would not have changed anything," he said, and there was no pride in it, no need for recognition, just a statement that had been true before she arrived and remained true after. Clara stepped down from the porch, her boots meeting the ground with a steadiness she had not felt in a long time, and walked a few steps closer, stopping at a distance that no longer felt like a barrier. "Most people would have," she said, not accusing, not praising, just stating what she had seen too many times to question. Ethan gave a small nod, not disagreeing, not agreeing either, just acknowledging the truth. In her words without letting it define his own. "Most people are not standing here," he replied, and the simplicity of it left no space for argument. Clara let that settle, the meaning unfolding not in the words themselves, but in the space around them, and she realized that what had felt rare, what had felt impossible, was not something extraordinary, it was something chosen. The wind moved gently across the open land, carrying the scent of dry grass and sun-warmed earth, and for a moment, everything felt still in a way that did not ask for change. Clara looked out toward the horizon, the same line she had once measured for escape, and now it held no urgency, no pull, just distance that existed without demanding anything from her. "I thought stopping meant losing," she said quietly, more to the land than to him. Ethan followed her gaze, his eyes resting on that same far line, and after a moment, he spoke, his voice low, steady, like something that had been understood long before it was said. "Sometimes it means you finally see where you are." Clara breathed that in, not as advice, not as comfort, but as something real enough to hold on to. And in that moment, standing beside a man who had never tried to move her, she understood something that had taken her miles to reach. She had not been chased into this place. She had chosen it. And for the first time, that choice felt like it belonged to her. The afternoon light softened as it stretched across the ranch, turning everything quieter, slower, like the day itself was beginning to rest, and Clara Whitmore stood near the fence where Ethan had worked earlier, her fingers tracing the rough wood without thinking, feeling its steadiness, its place, something that had not moved or changed no matter what passed through. She had spent so long measuring the world by what could be lost, what could be taken, what could turn without warning, that standing beside something that simply remained felt unfamiliar in a way she did not know how to name. Ethan Cole was nearby, not watching her, not guarding her, just present, working through small tasks that did not need to be done all at once, giving the space around them room to breathe. The quiet between them had grown into something that did not need filling, not with questions, not with reassurances, just something shared without being spoken. Clara looked out across the land again, but this time her eyes did not search for movement, did not calculate distance. They rested, taking in the open stretch as it was, wide, honest, unchanged. "They thought I would come back," she said after a while, her voice calm, not carrying fear, not even anger, just a memory spoken without weight. Ethan leaned lightly against the fence post, his gaze following the horizon, not reacting, just listening. "And you did not," he said, not as a question, not even as a confirmation, just placing the truth where it belonged. Clara shook her head slowly, the motion small, but certain. "No," she replied. "I kept thinking if I went far enough, I would be free." She paused, her hand still resting on the wood, feeling its rough surface under her fingertips. But it was never about distance. The words settled between them, quiet, but complete. Ethan nodded once, the kind of acknowledgement that did not interrupt, did not add, just allowed the thought to stand on its own. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying with it the warmth of the late day, and for a moment, Everything felt still in a way that did not ask for change. Clara turned slightly, looking at the house, at the porch where she had stood unsure, at the doorway she had hesitated to cross, and she realized how much had shifted without anything around her needing to move. "I do not feel like I am running anymore," she said, almost surprised by her own words, as if hearing them for the first time made them more real. Ethan glanced at her then, just briefly, not to check, not to question, just to hear it where it stood. "Then you are not," he said, simple, steady, and the certainty in it did not come from him. It came from what she had already decided. Clara let out a slow breath, the kind that did not carry tension, just release, and she felt something settle into place inside her, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in a way that felt lasting. The land stretched around them, unchanged, but no longer something to cross or escape, just something to stand within. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows once again, but they did not carry the same weight as before. They did not reach for her, did not pull her away. They simply existed, as everything else did, without demand. Clara rested her hand fully against the fence, grounding herself in something real, something steady, and for the first time, she understood that what had changed was not the world around her. It was where she chose to stand within it.